What's up, everybody? So Jason Lyden here with Conquer Athlete on the Conquer Athlete YouTube channel. Today, I'm talking about something that I think is misunderstood a lot in the sport of CrossFit, and that's how we progress Metcons across the training year. Because a lot of athletes and coaches, Metcons becomes random, right? They're hard, they're intense, they make people breathe, they create fatigue, they feel like quote unquote CrossFit. But the question is, are they actually progressing the athlete? That is the difference, right? Because a hard workout is not always a productive workout and expose fitness. But a well-designed progression is going to build fitness. Keep that in mind. And when we are talking about the sport of CrossFit, Metcons are not just conditioning pieces. They're opportunities for us to build capacity, movement efficiency, fatigue resistance, limiter tolerance, and the ability to express skill and strength under stress. So when I'm looking at progressing Metcons across the year, I'm not just saying, how hard can we make this? I'm asking, what quality are we building? Limiter are we targeting? What does the athlete need now? What do they need to maintain? What do they need to express later in the season? And how do we move from a controlled work into more of a chaotic, competitive situation? That's the lens that I'm always looking through. We have to understand that Metcons need purpose, right? The first thing we need to understand is the purpose is for the bigger plan. In CrossFit, the athlete needs to be able to move through mixed modal tasks under fatigue. That means they have to blend strength, gymnastics, weightlifting, monostructural work, breathing transitions, pacing, and skill. But the way we train that changes depending upon the phase of the year. Early in the year, I may not need the athlete doing high chaotic, high intensity competition style workouts all the time. I may need them to build their base, build tissue tolerance, develop sustainable work, raise their ceiling around the volume, identify what breaks first when fatigue shows up. Later in the year, I have to move that base into intensity. I need to create high pressure environments. I need to challenge their decision making, and I need to see if they can hold movement quality when the workout gets messy. But that only works if the foundation is built first. If the foundation is built first, then you can sustain and continually build upon that versus just having the proverbial term, house of cards fall apart. In the earlier phases of the training year, the goal is not always to chase the highest intensity possible. You have to keep that in mind. The goal is to build the athlete's ability to handle training. This is where we are developing capacity, resilience, and sustainable work, right? This is going to mean longer aerobic pieces, controlled mixed modal work, repeatable intervals, lower skill density training, intentional movement selection, controlled breathing, consistent pacing, and volume that the athletes can recover from. This is where I want the athletes to learn how to work without constantly redlining, quote unquote, developing the athlete's IQ. And that's really what we're trying to do. The better IQ they can have, the better they can dissect and interject changes and movement differences when competition starts showing up. Right? Because in the beginning part of the year, it's about how much it's with inside. Let me backtrack a little bit. The sport of CrossFit is not just how hard you can do something once. We know that. A competition, the open, all these things is not just one workout. It's how much work can we do and can we repeat it and hold on to it from an output standpoint without falling apart. So in this phase, I want to use these Metcons in a more controlled fashion, right? The goal is not to bury the athlete. The goal is to build sustainable output. I want to see if they can breathe. I want to see, can they transition well? I want to see, can they keep movement clean? Can they repeat similar splits? And I want to see what starts to fade first. This is where we start collecting information because the Metcon is not just training, it's assessment, it's data collecting, and that's how we have to look at it. One of the biggest mistakes that coaches make is treating all fatigue the same. Fatigue is not just fatigue. An athlete can fail at a Metcon for a lot of different reasons. They may have an aerobic limiter. They may have local muscular endurance limiter. They may have a strength endurance limiter. They may have a skill fatigue limiter. They may have a breathing and bracing limiter. They may have poor pacing. They may lack transition efficiency. They may lack movement economy. And they may lack confidence under fatigue. Those are not all the same problems. And this is what we're always looking at. When an athlete breaks down, we want to know, did their engine fail? Did their grip fail? Did their legs fail? Did their positions fail? Did their skill disappear? Did their ability to breathe get out of control? Did they make bad decisions because they were uncomfortable? All this matters if we want to get this person to progress well and get them to perform at the highest level. Because if an athlete's limiter is barbell cycling under fatigue, I do not need to just give them more random conditioning. I need to progress barbell exposure under the right fatigue condition for them. If their limiter is gymnastics volume, I need to build capacity before I can throw more high density, high intensity gymnastics chaos at them. If their limiter is pacing, I need to teach them what sustainable output feels like before I can ask them to compete at a higher intensity. So when I'm progressing Metcons, I want to start with control work before I add fatigue. And this is especially important with skills. If an athlete cannot perform a movement well fresh, they're not going to magically perform it when fatigue settles in. And they don't possess the skill and they don't have that ceiling, they're not going to magically raise it when they start doing more work, more fatigue, more intensity. So early progressions look like skill isolation, low-level fatigue, slowly add volume intensity. I'm going to add some interference work. Then I'm going to add intensity, and then I'm going to add more competition pressure, right? And that's the proper progression. So like if we're trying to improve ring muscle-ups under fatigue, I may not start throwing them into a workout with 50 ring muscle-ups and heavy cleans. I'm going to start with strict pulling strength, transitional strength, low volume ring muscle-up touches. Then I'm going to have controlled mixed modal pieces where they can perform small sets under manageable heart rate with proper mechanical prowess. Then over time, I'm going to add density. Maybe now and then I'm going to add some more intensity to it, like rowing and other aspects. Then I'm going to start looking at different levels of fatigue around the muscle up and build upon that. And I want to continue to build upon that skill towards a sport, getting closer to that competition chaotic situation. Another major concept that's misunderstood is when to build volume and when to push intensity. Early in the year, I usually want to add more volume and more controlled exposure. That does not mean it's easy. It means the intensity is managed so the athlete can accumulate quality work, build resilience, raise their ceiling. If an athlete needs to get better at wall balls, burpees, rowing, running, toes bar, barbell cycling, they need enough exposure to adapt. But if the exposure is a race, the quality is going to drop. The fatigue cost rises, and the athlete never really truly builds that base. Right? So we may use more volume at moderate intensity. And we can do this through different fashions like EMOMs, intervals, sustainable ANRAPs with the proper exercise selection and rep count, a repeatable mixed modal sets, zone 2 work, threshold-based intervals as long as it's the prescription can be executed by the athlete. Density progressions work really well. And then movement-specific volume accumulation, right? The goal is to increase the athlete's ability to do more work without blowing up. Then as we get closer to competition, we can shift that ratio, right? Less general volume, more specific intensity, more sport-specific combinations, more pressure, more consequences, and more pieces that look and feel like competition itself. We can't keep pushing both forever. If volume goes up, intensity needs to be managed. If intensity goes up, volume needs to be controlled. And we play this ratio with the objective of continually raising each one over that training lifespan for the athlete. And then as we get into that middle part of the year, like this is where we really want to start connecting capacity to more of those CrossFit demands. We're still building, but we're becoming more targeted. And this is where I look at the athlete's limiters to start placing them into Metcons with intent, right? For example, if an athlete struggles with leg fatigue, we may build progressions around squatty patterns, lunging, wall balls, running, and biking. If an athlete struggles with grip, we may progress pulling, carries, rope climbs, toes to bar, things that are just going to be more of like a complementary fatigue standpoint. If an athlete struggles with high skill gymnastics under fatigue, well, now we're going to use controlled exposure that progresses toward more density with less rest. But again, it's not random, right? We're always asking what is the limiter? What does the athlete need? How do we expose it without overloading the system? How do we progress it week to week? And how do we know it's improving? This is where Metcons become a tool, not just a test. We need to utilize Metcons as a tool, as data, just like everything else that we do. And then once we have built enough capacity, we now need to teach the athlete how to express it. And this is where intensity becomes more important. In CrossFit, you need the ability to suffer, but suffering without structure is not the goal. The goal is to express high output while maintaining execution. The goal is to, again, express high output while maintaining execution. That means the athlete has to learn how to move fast, make decisions, stay composed, and keep their mechanics together. This is where the environment starts to look more like the sport. The athlete has to deal with transitions. They have to deal with uncomfortable combinations. They have to deal with skill interference, breathing limitations, local muscular fatigue, and the workouts where the plan may need to be adjusted in real time, right? Because that's sport. But the chaos should be earned. You can't just throw them into that. You have to build towards it, right? So when I talk about chaos, I'm not just talking about random programming. I'm talking about controlled, unpredictability that prepares the athlete for the sport, right? The floor layout may change, the standards matter, the judge matters, the transitions matter. Everything matters. And in real time, you have to learn with changes that can occur from each component. But again, this all comes from proper progression. Early is controlled work. Middle part of the year is targeted limiter work. Later part of the year is intensity and sport-specific expressions. And then you have that competition phase, which is the chaos, the pressure, and then the execution. So as we move closer to that competition season, the goal is going to shift. We are no longer trying to build everything. We are trying to express what we've already built, right? And this is where training becomes more specific. We are looking at likely demands, open style paces, quarterfinal style paces, semifinal style tests, heavy and skill combinations, high skill work under fatigue, standards, strategy, execution, transitions, time caps, all these things come into play. The Metcons now need to look like the sport, but the biggest mistake is trying to do that competition style training all year. You're gonna get burnt out. It's gonna smoke you. It's gonna beat you down. You're just trying to survive, right? So when we get into that competition phase, we have to be more selective. If the intensity goes up, the volume needs to be managed. The goal is to show up ready to express what you've built. Now, I always need to think about fatigue limiters, right? It's a huge part of how I design training. Because most athletes not just need to get fitter. They need to understand where their fitness breaks down. That's the difference. Some athletes break down mechanically, some aerobically, some through strength endurance, power endurance, some lose skill, confidence, pacing, all these things matter. So we need to look at fatigue in layers, right? Can they perform the movement fresh? Can they perform it after low level fatigue? Can they perform it after local fatigue? Can they perform it with breathing fatigue? Can they perform it when the pace is high? Can they perform it when the workout is no longer comfortable? And can they perform it when there's pressure? And that's the proper progression that we look at when trying to improve the limiters for these people. Improvement comes from the right dose at the right time with the right progression, followed by the right recovery. Because we always talk about fatigue management, and we did a video on that a couple ones back. So principles for progressing Metcons. Number one, build capacity before you demand expression. Number two, identify the limiter. Number three, move from control to chaotic. Number four, respect the volume and intensity relationship. And number five, Metcons should build, not just test, right? So in closing, when we talk about progressing Metcons for the sport of CrossFit, we have to stop thinking about them as random hard workouts. They are training tools. Keep that in mind. They should develop the athlete's capacity, resilience, work capacity, limiter tolerance, skill under fatigue, pacing, and competitive execution. Early in the year, we build. Then we start to connect those limiters to more specific mixed modal work. Then we increase intensity. Then we add pressure. Then we create more chaos. Then in the competition season, we express what we've built. And that's progression. The goal is not to always make the athlete tired. The goal is to make them better. We have to keep that in mind. And that is where good programming matters. Progression that actually build ability takes thought, assessment, and clear understanding of the sport. So I hope you found this video very useful and informative. If you have more questions, if you have things you want to add or hear us talk about, feel free to drop them below. Give us a like, share, all that cool YouTube stuff, and I'll see you guys on the next one.